How can you get a great interview? How can you be good at interviewing people?
There's a lot that could be done to have this done a lot sooner.
As far as working, doing elevator repairs 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, I don't see that as being a typical process.
Thank you, Bo. Thank you. All right, it's back to you, Jim.
Ollie, don't let her go away. That's what. Does she have a response to that? Is she still there?
What's that?
Did the lady just leave?
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad. We should have kept that discussion.
She's back if you want her.
Yes.
She heard you.
Yes.
What'd you like to know? So what do you want now?
Well, if I have to teach you how to be a reporter, Ollie, I'll do that later.
I'll give a few tips and tricks in a minute, but humor me with this tangent because I think it's an important perspective in thinking about interviewing people. I've noticed we tend to think about interviewing like we think about relationships. That when we're young, we think relationships should come natural because the emotion, love, comes naturally to us. And so if I'm in love and this person is in love, therefore the relationship should work. And as we get a little bit older, we recognize, oh, were we mistaken? In fact, relationships take practice. They are a skill in and of themselves. And that's why usually the first couple of relationships we're all in, when we're 16, 17, 18, 24, the tendency to explode like a helium zeppelin. And we recognize, or begin to recognize, what we're witnessing when we've seen somebody married for 30 years are two people that are very good operators in relationships. And the same thing is true of interviews. We have a tendency to think like, oh, interviewing is like conversation. And we have conversations all the time. I have dialogue with my friends, dialogue with my parents, dialogue with my coworkers. Nothing to it. I speak all the time.
Welcome back to Low Def. I'm Gordon Keith, here with another videotaped TV interview with Zach Galifianakis, star of It's Kind of a Funny Story. Zach, thank you for being here.
Sure, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Compare and contrast this film with all the other films that have been made.
With all the other films that have been made?
Well, yes.
And then you do a couple interviews and you recognize, oh, it's actually a skill, and the people that I watch or listen to that give really good interviews, like I'm listening to This American Life and Ira Glass is just talking, he seems like he's just having a conversation. Oh, he's just a really high operator of interviews. He's just really good at it. He's really well practiced. He is the 40 years married in a solid relationship of giving an interview. And so with that perspective, the first thing I want to talk about in getting better at giving great interviews is to practice on your friends. Because to paint very broad brushstrokes the size of the canvas itself, one massive brush, boop, there are really two types of interviews. There is the interview where you try to understand the person, and the interview where you try to get information from the person. And I want to focus on the latter, where you're trying to get information from the person, because that's inherently a little more combative, a little more of a repartee, where it requires a little more thinking on your feet, cleverness, and research and understanding about what's going on. It's not understand the person. It's not a Rolling Stone interview where you're bopping along in the car with them for 3 days. Like, oh, wow, they roll their own cigarettes. How cool is that, man? And, man, they listen to Fleetwood Mac. I would have never guessed that. Right? And we're not talking about that type of interview. We're talking about the type of interview where you're interviewing a person that either is the story or has the story you're trying to get out of them.
How'd you like being in jail?
And to do that, the best way to practice and find your weak points in giving interviews is practice on your friends, because you know your friends pretty well already. You know their history, you know their general characteristics, so it won't require the level of research it would for a proper interview. And when you go in and you sit down and interview your friends with a tape recorder or a video camera for 20 minutes, I imagine you'll find a couple things. After the interview, you'll find, one, you take a little too long to ask the question. There are too many extra words and sentences in each question you ask. And that's a problem which we'll talk about in a minute. The second thing you'll notice is that your friend, the interviewed subject, takes a little too long to answer every question you ask. And they kind of ramble on and on and on. And the third thing you'll notice is that you might have a tendency to be overly polite when you're interviewing the person. Even if you're kind of a rough and tumble gal or guy that's, in real life, you might notice yourself being rather polite in that interview. And that's because in an interviewing setting, a few things work on us psychologically. And the first is the social politeness of having somebody formally sit down and them being a tape recorder or them being a camera and them taking the time to answer your questions. You don't want to upset them. So the first thing to do is recognize that that your natural instinct is to be polite when maybe you shouldn't be. The second part of this is that when you take too long to ask a question, when there's too many extra words in your sentences, or it really should be a sentence, you give the interviewed subject opportunity to go down different roads than the ones you want. You allow them to hook their mind onto words that aren't really related to the precise question you want, and then go on these random tangents, never quite answering the question. Now, your friend may do this out of just kind of naive innocence because they found this thing you were saying at the first part of your question more interesting than the actual question itself. But people that are relatively media trained and have been the subject of interviews before will use it to anchor a word and make it seem like they're answering your question without ever actually answering your question. And a good example of including too many words in a question and then getting it spun around on you is this Vox video here. So they break down how Kellyanne Conway is very good at latching onto a specific word that the interviewer has asked in his question, but because he or she has used too many words in the question, they've opened up wiggle room to answer the question without answering the question. So you see Kellyanne Conway again and again and again anchoring words without answering the question.
That claim is groundless. Isn't it irresponsible for a president-elect to make false statements like that?
I think it's groundless. For talk about fake news, the fake news is that somehow the popular...
No one is questioning the victory. I said, is it appropriate, is it responsible for a president-elect to make false statements like that?
Well, first, many people are questioning the victory.
Alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods.
Chuck, do you think it's a fact or not that millions of people have lost their plans or health insurance?
You don't know what his finances are. You don't know who's giving him money.
Here's what I do know.
How do you know the government of Qatar hasn't given him $1 million?
Here's what I do know. I know we've got the Democrats on the run.
So the way to eliminate this is to really reduce any question you want to ask to as minimum viable words as necessary. And it takes a little work. Sometimes it will manually require writing out the question and thinking like, how can I reduce this down? How you think like Hemingway, remove every adjective, every extra word. Nope. The third part of this is that often the subject will ramble for too long too, and that's because we don't like dead air as humans. It makes us feel uncomfortable.
That was one of my favorite days of the year, was being able to hold your lovely daughter.
Without you interjecting, which you won't initially because you want to be polite, they have a tendency to talk for too long. And so I have found, most subjects will either give a good answer in the first 10 to 15 seconds or not. And after 10 to 15 seconds, if they're not giving you the information you need, you should interrupt them. And that's okay. It may feel aggressive, it may feel assertive. That's okay. You can either ask them the same question repeatedly over and over again. You can recalibrate it. Whatever you need to do, but do not be afraid to interject and realign whatever they're saying to what you want them to answer. And a good example of this is Jeremy Paxman. Jeremy Paxman is perhaps one of the greatest interviewers there ever was. And this clip is him just hammering a politician over and over again. A politician is trying to dodge Jeremy's question, and Jeremy just won't give in. He just repeatedly asks the question, and he comes across as rude, as obstinate, as a little brisk. But by him asking the question over and over again, he actually gives us, the audience, more information about this politician, who this politician is, what his character is really like, and the fact that he's lying, than Jeremy would have if he had just moved on to the next question.
Did you threaten to overrule him?
I was not entitled to instruct Derek Lewis, and I did not instruct him. And
Did you threaten to overrule him?
The truth of the matter is that Mr. Marriott was not suspended.
Did you threaten to overrule him?
I did not overrule Derek
Did you
Lewis.
threaten to overrule him?
I took advice on what I could or could not
Did you
do,
threaten to
and I
overrule
acted
him?
in accordance with that advice. I did not overrule Derek
Did you
Lewis.
threaten to
Mr. Marriott was not suspended.
Did you threaten to overrule him?
I have accounted for my decision to dismiss Derek Lewis.
Did you threaten to overrule him?
Detail before the House of
I know you're not
Commons.
asking a question, whether you threatened to overrule him.
The important aspect of this, which is very clear to bear in mind.
I'm being really rude, but...
Yes, you can...
I'm sorry.
You can straight yes or no. I will give you an
Did you
answer.
threaten to overrule him?
I discussed this matter with Derek Lewis. I gave him the benefit of my opinion.
With respect, that is not answering the question whether you threatened to overrule him.
It's dealing with the relevant point, which is what I was entitled to do and what I was not entitled to do.
With respect, you haven't answered the question whether you threatened to overrule him.
Don't be afraid to repeat the question over and over again. Even though it may come across as rude or you may feel like you're being obstinate, remember, your mind is going to automatically make you more polite than you really need to be because of the social compliance of the setting. And so that's why practicing on your friends, where you can be a little more, loosen up a bit more, will get you prepared to be more assertive and aggressive in an actual setting. so that you can interrupt 10 to 15 seconds in if they're not giving the answer you want, and realign the question or ask them again and again and again. The other psychological problem that will play on you as an interviewer, especially as you become a journalist or it's a serious interview, is we have a tendency as humans to not want to burn the bridge, the bridge of communication or future dialogue with this person, because they might be useful to us, they might get us a lot of views, or they're a big name, or people will listen to this podcast because I got Elon Musk, or I got Bill Gates, or whatever crazy big name that's super exciting, and I don't want to offend them too much because what if they never come back on? Don't worry about that. Your goal should be to deliver the best interview or best information possible to your viewer this time and this time only. And often, people will give lackluster interviews because they want to maintain a relationship over really digging in deep to the interview and not worrying about the relationship at the end of the day. And I can tell you, as somebody who's worked in the media for 5 years now, often it's a two-sided street, and that the interviewed subject may need you just as much as you may need them. And so, yeah, you may offend them, or may be obstinate, or may be rude and make them uncomfortable, but down in the line in the future, we can't predict the future. And often, I've seen it time and time again, where they get on a publicity tour, they need to correct the record, and they're looking for media platforms where they can speak out and have an interview. Whatever it is, you might find them coming knocking on your door again, especially if you got a good, big engagement audience on that first interview. Yeah, it may have made them feel uncomfortable, but they'll remember 2 years from now, like, but it did get 1 million listens, it did get 1 million views, and I really want to promote my book, or my movie, or whatever I'm doing now. I'll go back on it, like at least it'll get my message out. And so you'll find that they will respect the number more than they'll disrespect you being obstinate or asking the question again and again. So don't worry about burning the bridge, or don't worry about alienating your interview subject. That shouldn't be your goal. Once again, psychologically, your mind's gonna be like, I want to be gentle, kid gloves. Don't have the kid gloves on. More than likely, if you deliver a good interview, the numbers will track them down the road again in the future to come back for another interview. So hopefully you found that informative. You now have a few techniques to give a smashing, fantastic interview and be the next Jeremy Paxman, or at least surpass your other journalistic colleagues as you enter the media or YouTube or podcasting arena. Thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you found this interesting. Like, subscribe. See you guys tomorrow. Bye.